everyone, and welcome to the Love of Wisdom podcast, episode 5. I'm here with my good friend Claire, who is the owner, founder, operator, lifeblood of animal rescue called Charlie's Place. And I thought it would be interesting to get you on because you have a inspirational, admirable work ethic and do an insane amount to support and help animals for very little reward. And I thought it would be interesting to... You getting emotional?
No, I just... the bit about not getting any reward is just so true.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought it would be interesting to delve into what that's like, why you do it, and what it is. So I guess an interesting place to start would be what it is that inspired you to start an animal rescue. You know, how long's Charlie's Place existed?
Charlie's Place has been called Charlie's Place since 2018. We've had rescue animals on site for as long as I can remember. The land was bought by my dad in 1980, so it sort of organically, accidentally became a sanctuary of sorts, just privately funded. When Will and I took over the whole care and ownership of the place, it started to look more and more like a sanctuary as opposed to a private collection of animals.
So what was your dad using it for then? Was it just...
I was a little girl that loved ponies. So as we collected ponies, it came to a point where we needed our own piece of land. Otherwise it was too expensive. I kept growing, so I kept having to have a bigger pony. A bigger pony? Yeah, but we couldn't part with the pony that I'd outgrown.
Okay. So, was it like a pony for every birthday?
Not quite that bad. You're making me sound like a really spoilt child, which I absolutely wasn't, because even back then I was taught to have a really good work ethic, and I only got to have fun with my ponies once I'd done all the hard graft every day. Yeah. So that did me an awful lot of good.
So did you have to do the graft of actually looking after the ponies then? You were mucking shit from a young age.
Yeah, from the age of 8. Yeah. That's all I've ever known.
All you've ever known. Well, that is, I've spent a fairly meagre amount of time really, but I've spent some time working on animal sanctuaries, and 90% of the work is shoveling shit from one place to another.
It absolutely is.
Yeah, it's humbling work, I would say.
Yeah. Well, when we got to 2018, we decided to give the sanctuary a name and accept public donations and turn it into more of an official commodity, rather than just as doing it as a hobby and having every penny out of our pockets spent on the animals. We reached a point...
I suspect that every penny out of your pocket still goes on the animals, doesn't it?
Yeah. But we reached a point where we were offered the chance to rescue quite a large number of expatriate hens, and it was the tipping point. We either said yes, but that meant we'd got to become more of a public entity and accept funding from people that wanted to help us and take volunteers on to help us to cope with the workload, or we said no and stayed as we were. So we decided to take that step.
So prior to 2018, how long had you and Will been sort of sole custodians of this piece of land? Or joint custodians, I guess. It's not...
A few years, just a handful of years. But I've been running the place single-handedly for quite a long time before that.
Was that sort of since your father passed, or was it?
It was 2001. It became solely my responsibility. So when I inherited the land.
A very long time.
Yeah.
So 21 years of shoveling shit on the same field.
Yeah.
Well,
you make it sound lovely.
Well, yeah. there's no point in glamorising it.
There is no way of glamorising it.
Well, I think that some people have a romanticised view of what a sanctuary is, and they think that it's just sort of walking around cuddling animals all day, every day.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's, you know, the animals that aren't always particularly loving or wanting attention and fuss. And
No.
there's some are, but, you know, lots of them just want to be left alone. And and you usually have too much work to do to spend that much time cuddling them anyway.
Yes. We often get to the end of a day and feel really bad that we didn't spend any quality time with the animals. So that's often where the volunteers come in. That, you know, that means that we can divide the work a little bit better and do the bit that I think is the most important and spend that time with the animals that do want that extra care and attention.
Yeah. Well, I imagine although I imagine there's always a shortage of quality volunteers, I imagine there's no shortage of volunteers. It's just that I suspect there's probably a few who are questionably sane. I'm trying to think of a polite way to put that, but I've met a lot of animal rights type people over the years who are very, very intense in their beliefs and would be quite hard work around a sanctuary, I could imagine.
We don't have to weed through those people. The people that are going to fit in are the people that do keep coming back anyway. So, yeah, you tend to end up only with the right sort of people in the end, because the people that have come for reasons that maybe aren't the right reasons.
Yeah.
Once they realise that it is quite a difficult place to be, that it's physically challenging, the weather isn't always glorious. We're on the edge of the Peak District, so we get some terrible weather in the winter.
Yeah.
And that there is an awful lot of difficult and challenging stuff that you do get to witness with animals coming in that have been really badly abused. And you do see a lot of death as well. So that tends to weed out some of the people that are there for reasons that maybe aren't the reasons that we would be hoping.
So it's sort of a self-selecting group, really, of volunteers.
Yeah.
Because I've experienced some environments where a similar process happens, and it sort of happens with the Army reserves, because there's quite a long process and you're not getting paid during that process. It's sort of like the people who keep it up are the people you want there, and they're the people who are going to put in the work and continue to it. So like in terms of recruitment, I remember speaking to the recruitment sergeant, and he said, well, if someone's not coming, I'm not going to keep chasing them to come, because the people who we want here are the people who are going to come anyway. Yeah. So it's sort of that process of thankless, difficult work that weeds out the people who aren't going to do it without the praise, I guess.
Yeah, we don't advertise for volunteers. The right people do find us. That is definitely true.
But I can't imagine that was instantaneous. I mean, you said you'd already been doing a number of years of working on there anyway.
Yeah.
So what, 2018, so about 4 years ago, you named it Charlie's Place. What is the story behind the name?
When I was in my old life working in the horse industry, I trained as a riding instructor. Not something that I would do anymore. Yeah. But there was a horse on the yard where I trained called Charlie. And he was an ex-race horse. He's already been dumped by the industry at the age of 2.5, 3. Yeah. Quite physically damaged by his experience in the racing industry. And he lived at this riding school, and I just knew he was my horse. And it took me 3 years to convince my boss that he should come home with me, which he did. And he was my horse of a lifetime. Horsey people will know what I mean by that. You meet one horse that you really connect with, and that was him for me. And he lived to the grand old age of 34. So he died sort of around the time that we were starting to think about, could we become a proper, fully fledged sanctuary? And I wanted his name to live on.
I assume he'd lived on the land for
Yeah.
the majority of that time.
Yeah.
So if he'd been, if the race industry didn't want him anymore, but he was at the yard for 3 years before you convinced him to have it, what was he doing there? Did they just keep the horses? Or
he
what
was a riding school horse. He belonged to the riding school. He was an absolutely brilliant riding school horse. He was super safe. He was never upset or afraid of anything. You could put a baby on his back. And he was just so gentle. Hence, he wasn't suited to the racing industry.
Yeah.
He hadn't got the spirit that is required.
So was it common for the riding school to take ex-race horses in that were past their sort of use to the race industry?
Not really, no. His was quite an unusual story. The woman that ran the yard, she would go to auctions, usually at Melton Mowbray, that just saw lots of horses coming through, and there would be meat men lined up bidding for these horses. So she used to buy any that she thought were anything close to being suitable for the riding school, or to bring home to prepare to sell on to somewhere nice.
Were they buying horses for meat? 'Cause I didn't realise there was a big horse meat trade in the UK.
Yeah.
Because I remember the outrage years ago when, was it Iceland or somewhere like that, where there was something about them having horse in their burgers and people were outraged by it.
Yeah, these are for animal feed, for glue. And I don't think it's the case as much anymore, but it used to be that they were mostly then ferried off abroad, still alive, and then slaughtered when they got to wherever they were heading.
Yeah, because I knew there is a horse meat trade in other countries, although I couldn't list the countries off the top of my head. I'm not that well informed on it, but I didn't think there was a big horse meat trade in this country. There's all of this is fascinating to me. It's it's a world that I'm completely oblivious to. So that's why I was asking questions.
Yeah, there are a lot of what you
would
would call knacker men that go to all the horse auctions, including places like the New Forest and Dartmoor and Exmoor, where they round up the wild ponies.
Wild horses,
a lot of those are bought by the knacker men. So Charlie escaped that.
Yeah.
And then through a long-winded process ended up with me, and he was just such a gentle, kind soul, and he was my best friend, and there was no way I was ever going to let his legacy be forgotten. It just felt like the perfect name for the sanctuary.
Yeah. So it sounds as well like he invoked the caring spirit that the sanctuary sort of tries to embody in some ways. So what would be the normal life expectancy for, say, like a wild horse, like say the ones on Dartmoor or something like that? Because 34 sounds very old to me.
For a thoroughbred, for a larger horse, yes. The smaller native breeds are more hardy, and they tend to live maybe into the 30s.
Yeah.
With really good care and with a lot of good luck, you can get them into the 40s. But you wouldn't have expected Charlie to live beyond 25, really.
Yeah. So he had a very long life.
He had a charmed life. That's what he had.
He must have had high quality care to.
And didn't do an awful lot of work either. He occasionally went for a wander around the countryside with me sat on his back, with him choosing where he wanted to go and at what speed, which was usually very slow.
Yeah. So, was it something about your experiences there that encouraged you to go vegan then? Or is this, am I connecting dots that aren't there?
At the age of 14, I went vegetarian. As a result of doing work experience from school at a vet's, and it was as simple as I was seeing animals on the operating table and I was seeing meat. It's as simple as that. In a 14-year-old's brain, that was the connection made, and I went veggie at 14. I didn't go vegan for quite a few years. I think I've been vegan about 7 or 8 years now. It was only exposing myself to a community of other vegans that made me see that was something that was possible. Up to that point, I was a little bit lazy about the idea. In theory, I thought it was fantastic and that I should do it one day. But then making that big shift, and it is an effort, isn't it, in the early days to practically be vegan is not easy.
Any significant change to your lifestyle is hard.
Yeah.
You know, like if you start a gym routine, it's hard to start a gym routine, but once you get into it, it's all right. And anyone who goes on a diet, you know, people are always complaining about their diets when they're on them.
And in order to make that big change to your behaviour, you have to admit that what you were doing before was wrong. And that's not always easy.
I'm not sure that that's a... I think, and possibly this is just me, because I went vegan when I was about 19 years old. It was around about my 19th birthday, actually, but I'd been vegetarian my whole life. And funnily enough, I remember having the conversations when I was a teenager with my best friend at the time when I was living in Ireland, and he had to explain to me what a vegan was, and I was like, I'd never do that. That's ridiculous. And I remember that conversation really clearly to this day, and it's just funny to me that I had that conversation one day and then I changed my mind later on. But my reasons, like I don't have a huge conviction that being vegan is the right thing as such, but it's the right thing for me at this point in time. And well, it's probably at this point, you know, it's been 12 years. It's probably the right thing for me for the rest of my life. Let's be honest. But I think that it might be because of the age, you know, the arrogance of youth and all that. But I didn't feel there was any challenge in sort of saying, oh, what I'd been doing was wrong, because I got this self-righteous buzz of thinking, you know, yeah, I'm doing the right thing now. I'm morally pure, and you know, I'm sure I was insufferable to people around me back then, because I did do the whole new vegan, you know, how do you know someone's a vegan? Because they'll tell you, like that was me for 19, 20, 21. So yeah, it's an interesting process, and people come to it for different reasons, don't they? So I guess I can imagine if someone came to a realization, who was like a meat eater, and came to a realization that they wanted to become vegan for moral reasons, and decided that what they'd been doing was morally wrong. I can see that's a challenging process, and you know, there is but I've become a big advocate generally in loads of different ways for this sort of brutal self-honesty and sort of identifying your flaws, and because I think it's fundamental for transformational growth. You know, I think to improve, you first have to admit that you can improve. It's like a starting point, but it can be really, really difficult. And one of the examples I always use to clients at work is like, I'm like, you lie to yourself all the time. They're like, no, I don't. I'm like, how often do you come into your house, tell yourself, I'm going to do the washing up in a minute, and then sit down and go on your phone, and you keep saying, I'll do the washing up any minute, and then it's 2 hours later and you haven't done it? We lie to ourselves all the time, and actually it's quite hard to go, no, I'm lying to myself here, or I'm making an excuse, or I'm doing this. And that's about something relatively trivial like doing the washing up. But, you know, people, well, obviously the sort of nature of the work I do, I'm quite often working with people who may be perpetrating abuse, or maybe sort of neglecting their children or something like that. And I'm like, none of this can change, and we can't go away until you admit to what you're doing is wrong. And it's a big thing for someone to sort of say, yeah, actually, I need to change. But it's a prerequisite for actually changing. So you say Sorry, I got something in my eye. So you say you went vegan about 7 or 8 years ago. How instrumental was that to the process of, how much of an integral part of that was of the change to Charlie's Place and becoming an actual sanctuary was the fact that you'd gone vegan, or were they sort of separate occurrences really?
They were definitely going hand in hand, because the first animals we decided that we wanted to actively rescue and rehome or rehab were animals directly from the agricultural industry. Like that large number of hens from the Battery Farm.
Yeah.
It was a poor part of the process of me wanting to make those changes in my life, but I thought that isn't enough by me just going vegan. Yes, that is a wholesome thing to do, but I felt that was too much of a drop in the ocean for me, and I wanted to be able to make more of a difference than that. So by rescuing animals that are from those industries, be it an orphan lamb, a pig, a hen that is being raised for meat, a duck that's being raised for meat, a turkey, any of those animals, they're the ones that we focused on first.
Yeah.
And there is a selfish element to it. You want to try and make yourself feel better about things. It's not just about doing something fantastic for somebody else, be that a human or an animal. You do get a kick out of knowing that you have literally actively just saved a life. That does feel good.
Yeah, of course. I mean, there's a whole philosophical argument about whether we ever do anything truly selflessly or not. And
my work is not selfless. I get an awful lot of stress and heartache and difficulty from doing what I do, but I gain such a lot from it too. It gives me an awful lot.
Well, it's I feel very similar to that, in that I generally am someone who opts for responsibility. If I can feel a dip in my psychological state if I'm shirking or avoiding responsibility in any way, but I feel positive. I feel a sense of joy and a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose when I step into responsibility. So, that's reflected in my line of work. It's been reflected in many of the things that I've done outside of work, and I'm always sort of trying to take on more. Part of me gets a buzz that's like, how much can one man juggle? Let's see where the limits are, and the further I get to push that, I'm like, oh, maybe I can take on a little bit more. And then every few months I go, God, I'm so tired all the time. I need to just lie in bed for the day. And I notice that I'm just exhausted, no matter how much sleep I get and anything like that. So I sort of push myself to the limit. It's a thing I'm working on balancing. But there is a lot of psychological benefit, I think, to taking on responsibility and doing things that are hard. And that's but that doesn't make them easy to do, have you ever heard of the concepts of type 1 and type 2 fun?
No.
Okay. I first heard about this. This is something that I know more from the running and the hiking and all the sort of outdoorsy stuff. Is type 1 fun is basically things that are immediately gratifying. So like going out drinking and things like that you enjoy yourself, but you're not going to be talking about it in a week's time or a month's time or 10 years time, because you'll forget about it. And type 2 fun is the stuff that you hate doing at the time, but then you look back on it and you tell stories about it and you laugh and you're like, I'm so glad I did that. So I would, any time I do a long distance hike, for example, there are points where I'm like, my feet hurt, my back hurts, I've got heat rash on my shoulders from carrying my bag, I'm really hungry, I smell, I'm tired, all I want to do is quit. and like it's raining and it's windy, and I'm sort of having this real battle where I'm going, you could just go home, you could just give up now, and I hate it, I absolutely hate it when I'm there. And then I get to the end of it and I'm like, I'm so glad I did that. I feel so much better for having done that. Like, that feels like a big achievement. And that is type 2 fun. It's the delayed reward of doing something challenging. And that is that sort of, would you say what you're getting out of it is something like type 2 fun?
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. That sounds very familiar.
Yeah. But there was also something you said in there about something that sounded like guilt or something, feeling bad if you don't do it. Is that something? Have I picked up on that wrong, or have I read that wrong?
There is a little, maybe a tiny element of that. It feels like repairing a little bit of what I think I've got wrong in my previous years, when I just used to think nothing about picking up a cheese sandwich or whatever. And so I think there is a little bit of that I'm paying back a little bit as best I can, just doing my little bit. But also the biggest thing is that you don't just save that one animal, you have then people look on social media and see what you're doing, and that's getting a message out and setting a seed. People will come and visit the sanctuary and it will set the seed. So I'd like to hope that I'm doing more good, or the sanctuary is doing more good with more animals, a larger number of animals than the ones we've actually got. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's sort of it's the butterfly effect. You never really know the full impact of what you're doing, because you could have what seems like a relatively inane conversation with someone, and that could be a hugely significant conversation for them, and that could lead to them thinking about something else, and then they're like, one day they're like, oh, I need to go and I've sort of found this calling, and it's because they've been inspired by this relatively small conversation that you've had. Domino effect is probably better than the butterfly effect, but as an analogy, but it doesn't matter that much, does it? So it's been going for 4 years now as Charlie's Place, and have you grown in the size of what you're doing? Because I know that you've moved from, you said you sort of focused on agricultural animals at first, and I know that you do wildlife, because I've contributed to the wildlife.
You have. I am still trying to keep alive the hedgehog that you brought to me the other week. He's still on our kitchen table. He's a challenge.
Is he? Okay.
Don't feel guilty in the slightest.
No,
I can see that you don't.
Actually, I don't feel guilty. I, for anyone who, which is everyone who's not familiar with the story, I was out at work on a visit, and I went to visit a family, and I arrived, and they were like, "We've got a hedgehog in our garden," and this was around the time of the heat wave. It was very hot. And then it was the middle of the day, and there was a hedgehog running around their garden. And they sort of said he'd been running around their garden for the best part of a week, and they didn't know where he'd come from, and they were worried about the cats getting it. So I ended up, my work and my personal life activities the line got blurred, because I then had to call you and be like, what do I do with this hedgehog? Which... you must have had that for a while now. I reckon that's been about a month, probably. Yeah.
It's cost us quite a lot of money as well at the vets, just in case you're interested in that bit.
Well, I have a piggy bank there. I think it has some coins in it. You're welcome to take some.
We started off focusing on the meat industry and the egg industry and rescue animals from there, but we've got very limited space, so you can't do an awful lot of that unless you're continually rehoming. And we thought, what could we do? What more could we do? Because we didn't feel like we were doing enough. So we thought, let's have a look at wildlife too, because we know that that's a constant, or it's supposed to be a constant in and out. You don't have the animal for very long. And we also wanted to look at that so that we're satisfying the Charity Commission in every way that we possibly could, because we are in the process of becoming a registered charity. You have to be seen to be doing lots of charitable stuff in as many ways as possible. So a lot of the farm animals that we've got residing with us now are ones that aren't suitable for rehoming, and you've got to be really careful that it doesn't look as if you're just asking the public to fund for you to have pets, animals that are going to be with you forever. And wildlife is something that I was fascinated by having a look at anyway. And it has become by far the biggest part of the work that we do now, and takes up a lot of our time and a lot of our resources, but is just so enormously satisfying. We absolutely love it.
So wildlife, I know you've been bringing in hedgehogs, and I remember seeing some ducks there. What sort of like wildlife are you taking in? Are you taking in anything bigger, or is it all very small?
We have been lucky enough to raise some fox cubs. We've had, I think it's 6 badgers in so far.
How does it work with badgers? Because I can imagine, like, obviously if you get foxes in as cubs, they can be, they're not dissimilar to a dog. In terms of their physiology. They're fairly
easy,
Yeah, but I can imagine badgers. It's very hard for me to imagine badgers interacting with humans and being easy to sort of accommodate on the land. Or
you'd need very secure accommodation for them. They will eat the way out of anywhere, and you need all the safety kit. They are quite dangerous. So I've worked alongside our local badger group quite a lot, and that's where most of them come from. They've reported to the badger group, and we have sort of become the hospital for the badger group. But then Will and I take on all the day-to-day care of those badgers until they're hopefully ready for release.
Yeah. So the day-to-day care, I assume, is sort of like... Well, I'm assuming it's basically give them some food using a stick to keep yourself away, or...
They're surprisingly timid. Unless you make them feel threatened, they're not going to do you any harm. You wouldn't just walk up and stick an injection into a badger or anything like that, but they tend to hide away when you go in. It is minimal contact anyway. You go in once or twice a day as you absolutely have to, and clean them out, and food and water and any medication. Wherever possible, you hide medication in the food.
Yeah.
But then if you do need to get hands on, it's at least a 2-person job with a grasper and all your special safety gear, and dive in there and get it done as quickly as you can, and then escape again. Yeah. So they're wonderful creatures, but you do have absolute minimal contact with them for their sake as well as ours.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a lot of stress for them, isn't it? Which is going to adversely affect their recovery. Yeah. But I was just wondering. It just seems like a challenging animal to look after.
There aren't that many rehabs that take them in because they are that little bit more dangerous, hard to accommodate. And not all vets are willing to see them either for those reasons. Yeah. So you find a good vet, you become their buddy, and you hope that you never do anything to upset them so that they won't help you anymore.
I would imagine that your vet is probably never going to be upset with you because you're paying their mortgage.
It's actually a different vet that we use for the badgers to the...
Is it?
He's not willing or is not able to accommodate badgers,
that's
unfortunately.
Because you've probably bought him so much business that he can be picky now. He's probably like, I'm set for life, why would I put myself in danger?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah. It's interesting. So, one of the things, I mean, the work that you do is in and of itself inspirational because of the amount of commitment and dedication that it takes. particularly given the low reward. I mean, do you guys take a wage at all? Or
No.
Is that something that's on the books when you're a registered charity, if you ever grow to a size that you can, or is it?
No, Will's a trustee, so he isn't able to financially benefit from the charity anyway. I'm not able to be a trustee because I'm the landowner, so technically that muddies the waters a little bit if I was a trustee. But there are no plans for us ever to financially benefit. I lease the land to the charity for nothing. I don't even take the nominal amount of money from the charity as a lease. That would be more than acceptable for me to do that. I don't even do that. It's not within us to. I don't think there will ever be the spare money to do that, even if we wanted to. But that's not.
So on top of the thanklessness, you're rejecting what little rewards you could have.
You're making me sound even more insane than I believe I'm to be already.
No, it's admirable rather than insane. There's clearly what was clear when you were describing it from the very beginning is you clearly feel some sort of duty or desire to contribute something to the world beyond yourself, which is something that's very special to be able to do. And like you say, you get a reward in the feeling of accomplishment and the feeling of being able to do that. So I understand it. I'm not. Well, we've done many things together that are very thankless and challenging, and so I understand the motivation for that. But sanctuary work is every day, isn't it? The animals are still hungry on Christmas Day. The animals are still hungry when things are going wrong in your life or whatever's going on. And I know, that you have been through some fairly extreme adversity. And I wonder, are there points where you struggle with the motivation to do it? Are there days where you wake up and think, I don't even like those animals that much anyway?
You can go off them sometimes. It feels like the way I normally describe it to people that say, oh, you're so lucky, I wish I could have your life. It's not that I'm looking for self-pity, but I just think a reality check is sometimes a good thing. I describe it as being on a conveyor belt that you're not allowed to ever get off for a second. Most of the time it's wonderful and you want to be there, but there are times when I do take a step back and think, I'm not liking this at the moment. I don't want to do this anymore. And I used to really fight that and have an internal battle with myself and tell myself, well, you can't even think those thoughts. You've just got to carry on. You've just got to do another day. But then a couple of years in, I learned that it is okay to give yourself the option. Well, you could give this up. That would be okay. This isn't something that has to be forever. And the fact that I've given myself permission to think those thoughts just gives me that little bit of a breather. I might give myself a day where I say, right, volunteers, there's nothing too horrendous going off at the moment, is there? So I'm just going to maybe not be there for the next round of checks. I'm just going to go and have a bath, or I'm going to go and spend quality time with my daughter, or whatever it may be, or just go for a walk and give myself permission to get off that treadmill just for a moment. And then I always say to myself, now, do I want to go back to it, or do I want this to stop? Because this can all stop at any time, and I always want to get back on. I always want to carry on. But that has really made a difference to me, because I was starting to feel as if I was stuck in that situation. I was trapped.
Yeah.
We've got a social media following. We've got people that regularly donate to us. We've got people that give us money every month, and I can't let anybody down. This is something that's got to carry on and carry on and carry on, and it hasn't got to.
Yeah.
It probably will do quite a lot of years yet until I'm in my dotage, I'm hoping. But that really changed things for me, being able to just step back and say, no, I don't have to do this. I'm not trapped in this situation. And then I can look at it anew and come back to it and say, yeah, I do want to carry on.
Well, there's a big difference psychologically, isn't there, from something that you feel you're being forced to do and something that you feel you're doing as a choice. And you know, anyone who's ever done anything with kids will know the difference. If you tell your kids to eat their vegetables, then they will absolutely refuse. But if you convince them they want to eat their vegetables, then they'll do it with no protest and they'll be happy about it. And you know, that's a common trick that people wouldn't even think of it in psychological terms, but when working with kids, people always, and not even just with kids, like in my line of work, I am regularly sort of prompting people and just trying to nudge people to be like, it makes them want to do the thing that we want them to do, because if they want to do it, they're more likely to do it than if I say, I want you to do this, you need to do it. And so there is a big difference in how it feels to be making a choice to do something and feeling you have to do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, we all have to do some things like paying bills and things like that, but we all resent them when we have to do them. And you can put up with having to do something for a limited amount of time, but it's not sustainable in the long term. And if you've been taking care of these animals for however many years already, that's a very long time to feel obligated. So what are there must be situations though where, although you have that choice, or you're sort of that having that choice might sort of work in the long term for making you feel better about it, but there must be situations that come up where maybe there aren't volunteers about that day and you're having a terrible time, or you don't feel like doing it. Is it just sort of a mixture of guilt and grit that makes you go out in the rain when you don't want to and there's no one else to do it, or have you learned tricks for dealing with that as well?
I think a lot of it goes back to my upbringing, and no matter what, those animals just need they need care, and they aren't okay if you don't turn up. So I think, and I've also got quite a strong stubborn element to my personality. So regardless of whatever else is going on, my stubbornness helps me probably quite a lot at times.
Some people might call it grit.
I'll change how I think of it then. From now on, I'm gritty. I'm not stubborn. Thank you for that.
Well, I'll ask Will what he thinks.
He may beg to differ.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's just that I think there's so many different elements to those situations that make you keep going. And also, I've been through stuff that has been so difficult. I've been through real bad days in a way that I hope that a lot of the people that I know and love haven't been through. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what it is. I try and think of it as it's probably never going to be as hard as some of the stuff that I have lived through and survived and come out the other side of. In 1997, I had my first child, and he was stillborn. Yeah, I was going to say,
are you thinking of Luke in this situation?
When you have been through something like that, that is a truly difficult day to put one foot in front of the other. So compared to that, nothing else is ever going to be a fraction as hard as that.
So how did you? So that was 97. So how old were you at the time when that happened?
I was 24.
24. So
Yeah.
and I would guess that you probably you hadn't had anything like that to deal with on that scale.
I'd never had any experience of death up to that point. No, that was my first ever loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you manage through that? How did you cope through that? What?
To begin with, medication.
Medication in terms of like prescribed like antidepressants,
Yeah,
and anxiety,
yeah,
that sort of
sleeping
thing.
pills and stuff. And I think the thing that got me through it more than anything, because back in those days there wasn't a lot of support out there. There's an awful lot of wonderful support groups out there that you can go and be part of.
Yeah.
There wasn't really anything like that back then. It wasn't as bad as it was decades before, where you were told to just go home and forget about your baby and carry on. But it certainly wasn't as supportive an environment as it is now. It's wonderful now. I have been part of that in recent years. But I think the thing that really saved me is I did, just under a year later, have my second child. So I had to keep going, because I'd got another baby on the way, and then I had another baby to look after. But I think I was just functioning as a person. It took quite a few years before I'd got to a point where I was actually living life again. But the fact that I survived all that, I did all that, and I'm quite proud of myself that I'm still here despite all that. And I'm something close to being a whole person, I think. It does make you reevaluate what a bad day and what a problem really is. And nothing has ever seemed quite so insurmountable as a problem since Luke as it might have done before. It does make you see things in a different way. And that's not all the time. I have my days where I completely forget about all that and I'm as petty as the next person. But that never lasts for long. You do realise that, you know, that you've survived a big problem, and the problem you've got in front of you now isn't as big as that, so you can do it. You know, I have my days like everybody else where I think, oh no, I can't cope, can't do this. But I know deep down that I can. And that's quite empowering.
Well, I think that is, you know, it feels almost negligent to compare it to type 2 fun, because I don't want to use the term fun in that context, but there is something about suffering that is inherently empowering, I would say. Apart from, you know, it's the classic Nietzsche thing of, you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, because I draw on many things from my past that are either crazily difficult situations that I've gone through, or situations that I've put myself in, and like, you know, I would say I've had some fairly, well, I know I've had some fairly extreme experiences, because people regularly tell me when I speak about them that I should write a book, or sort of go, are you making this up? You know, these are quite common responses to some of my stories, and I'm always drawing on the fact that I'm like, well, if I did that, I can do this. And every challenging thing I do, I'm like, well, if I did that, what else can I do? And you sort of, you know, it gives you, probably one of the most demanding things that I ever did, in some ways, that I think is a very, very, very small section of the population would ever experience something on this scale, was during the first year of the Badger Cull, when they extended. So it was 6 weeks, which is the standard sort of format for the Badger Culls, but that was the first one, and it was a trial, and they missed all their targets, and they extended it, and I ended up being in a coal zone for 3 months, and at the time I didn't have any work or anything. I'd sort of committed myself to it 100%. I had 2 days off in those 3 months because other people made me, and I was really pissed off about it. I was like, I don't want to have a break, and they were like, you need a break. And so for 3 months I was sleeping, and the way we were dealing with the coal back then wasn't very refined because we didn't really know what we were doing. So we were quite often sleeping between 4 and 6 hours a night at most, and we would go out all day, walking across fields, doing what we do, and then we'd go to maybe like the chip shop, get some chips, and then we go straight back out for a night and stay out till like 4 in the morning, and then go home, have 4 hours sleep, and do it all again every day for 3 months. And this isn't, that in itself is a challenge, but this was confronting people with guns in the middle of the night with and I don't like to sort of make these comparisons, but when I was involved in that again several years down the line, I mean, I did it for years, but when I did it several years down the line, it was sort of a tried and tested formula to some degree. You sort of vaguely knew what you were going to expect. Obviously there's still anomalies, and you still get like high levels of aggression, but back then we just had no idea what to expect. We didn't know if people were going to be shooting at us. We didn't know like what was going to happen, and I was like in my early 20s, and and as I was doing that, there came a point where I'd been doing that for so long that I almost felt like invincible. I was like, well, if I've done all that, nothing else is going to touch me. and obviously that's a problem in itself if you go too far that way, and because believe it, you're invincible is a very good way to get yourself killed. But there is something about doing something that's really, really difficult and going through something that triggers all of those emotions, the fear, the sadness, the stress, all of those things, that afterwards you're like, I am stronger now. And you can feel it in yourself, so my mind's gone a bit blank. So going through everything that you went through with Luke is something that you sort of feel made you stronger in the long run. It sounds like there was it's not just about making you stronger though, or maybe this is part and parcel of the making you stronger. It sounds to me, although you can tell me again if I'm interpreting this wrong, it sounded to me like there was something about creating a sense of gratitude for what you do have that was in there. Is that right? Was I interpreting that? Was I hearing that in the story?
Yeah, and a lot of people that I've talked to that have been through similar experiences, because for quite a few years I volunteered supporting other people that were going through that. You do get a very similar story coming from most people, that everything is, you see the whole world, you see everything differently afterwards. Yeah. You go through a very, very black period, of course you do, and for me that was probably about the first 15 years. But you eventually, or for me, I reached a point where instead of being crushed by it, I started to very gradually see that I was a strong person because that had happened to me, and that I did maybe look at things in a slightly different way that somebody else might not look at things in the same way that somebody that has been through something as horrendous as that, the way that they might see something.
So in what way, I'm curious to really get down into that, to what you mean by like seeing it differently. What do you think that difference is?
I certainly don't sweat the small stuff anymore. I think that's the biggest one. And when you are presented with a really big challenge, I'm less fearful of that than I perhaps would have been before. Initially, maybe for the first decade or so, and I think it was because I was quite young, and I was very young for my age as well.
Well, 24, you're like hardly even an adult. You're still like, at 24, you're still figuring out a lot of stuff.
Oh, God, yeah. And I saw myself as a failure. I can't do anything. I'm no good for anything. I can't even carry a baby for an entire gestation and produce a live baby at the end of it. I'm just worthless. I'm a piece of shit. And that's how I viewed myself, at least for the first 10 years. But I didn't even notice it happening. But it's that sort of swap round to being the exact opposite. Eventually, I realised, I did really well. I've come out of that. I'm never going to have got over it. It's never going to be over. I will live with the pain of that every day for the rest of my life. But it does make me feel as if I am a really strong person, and I have really achieved to be able to sort of pull some sort of a life together and have a life with that backpack on my back all the time, that Luke isn't here, my baby died, all the horrible memories that you have that will never ever go away, that you have to carry forever. But I have formed quite a good life, and I've achieved a lot in my life so far, even though I've got that backpack on my back. And that makes me feel really quite good about myself. So whereas the first 10 years I was a failure, I was no use to anything or anybody, because I couldn't even do the most basic thing that a female should be able to do, and produce a live baby. It's really strange, and I can't even explain how or why or when it happened, but eventually, I don't know whether it's just survival. You can't live like that forever. But I'm definitely a person that believes I can bloody well do that. That's the way I tend to tackle most things now. I have my wobbles, of course I do, but generally I think, if I could do that, then I can do anything.
Well, yeah, I guess, one of the things that one thing I've always found very interesting, I've observed this in a number of different situations, is when I'm doing difficult things alongside someone who's maybe more anxious than me, then it's the way we process the potential risks are way different. And sometimes I've sort of had to drag people through things kicking and screaming, and I'm like, look, what's the worst that can happen? Or, it will be fine. And that one of those questions that people, it's almost, it's a trope, isn't it? What's the worst that could happen? But I guess to you can sort of ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? Well, I know what the worst that could happen is, and it's happened, and I managed that. If I've dealt with the worst that could possibly happen, then the worst that could happen here doesn't matter, does it, really?
Yeah. In
comparison. And yeah, the thing about not sweating the little stuff as well, I think that sometimes I generally think that people's lives are improved, and people will sort of say it's relative to some degree, but I think that practicing gratitude is really beneficial on a psychological level. When sometimes I speak to people and I hear them talking about an issue, and it's, it might be something fairly trivial in the grand scheme of things, but to them at that point it's that this issue's huge and things like that. And I'm like, when I hear that, I'm like, you should be so grateful that is the issue. That's the big issue. You should, and I try and practice this in my own life, and there are times I'm better, there are times that I'm worse at it. But if my car breaks down or something like that, and it's disrupting my day and it's really stressful and things like that, I will try and sit there and go, well, I have a car and I have somewhere to go, and I live in a country where everything is so efficient that I can probably get my car fixed this week, you know. And one thing I noticed actually that sprung into my mind while you were talking about it is I've done a lot of work with asylum seekers and refugees, and there are very few things at work that really get to me emotionally, but over the 6 years I could say there's probably a dozen times, maybe less, that something has moved me to tears. And one of the things that has always consistently done that is reading through the life stories of asylum seekers and everything they've been through, particularly because I tend to work with or when I did work directly with asylum seekers, it was adolescents. So quite often these were 16, 17, 18-year-old, mostly boys, because more men come than women, but also women. And, you know, they had stories where their parents had been killed in front of them, where they'd been chased out of their villages by people with guns, where they'd had the Taliban threaten their family if they didn't for them not joining the Taliban. They would never be able to speak to their surviving family again. They've travelled halfway across the world. They've spent some time sold into slavery. They've been raped. They've been this and that. And I would read through these life stories and I would be like, Jesus Christ, my problems are so small. And there are some exceptions to this, but almost universally they were the most polite, kind, and easy to work with client group ever. You know, they were just really grateful for absolutely everything you gave them. They always didn't want to disturb you. They would, hello, mister, and things like that. Like, you don't need to call me mister. Just say hey, it's fine. And oh no, actually, one of the things this is one of the things that softened my opinion on religion, because I used to be a fairly staunch atheist back then, and now I'm confused. Religiously confused is probably the best way to describe it. But one thing that would universally sort of come out when I speak to them, whether they were Muslim or Christian, I would ask them, you know, what got you through it, and they would almost always say God. And I was like, if I'm so convinced God isn't real, how is this idea of God having such a significant impact for these people to empower them to get through these things? And even if it's not real in a literal sense, does the power to influence people's lives in such a significant way, does that not make it real in a metaphorical sense at the very least? And yeah, so when I was listening to your story, I was just thinking of those asylum seekers to some degree, because, you know, that is real pain and suffering, and there seems to be something about that pain and suffering that makes people look at the world around them in a very different way.
It's like a factory reset.
Yeah.
All the stuff that mattered before suddenly doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
And all I have to do now is strive to maintain that as best I can. You slip a bit and then you remind yourself.
Yeah. I'm guessing you had a fairly firm reminder when Will was in hospital as well.
Yeah.
Was it last year, or has it been 2 years now?
It was February of last year.
Yeah.
So we're about 18 months in, aren't we?
Yeah.
Ish.
18 months. I was really struggling to add 6 and 2 together in my head there. Single digit maths has completely bamboozled me.
The biggest thing that I learned through that period is that the right thing to do is to accept support and help from other people, and how important that is to keep you going, keep you strong.
I bet you were at home going, oh, I've got a break from the sanctuary.
I missed about one session. I think I missed one day, actually. One day of going to the sanctuary.
Well, to be fair, I can imagine that sitting at home ruminating was probably less beneficial than...
But the animals provide me with comfort.
Yeah.
They're not just work. I find the place really healing. And having that normality as well. And as well being there and being able to talk about something other than Will and his illness. Having to talk about mundane stuff. And being amongst friends.
Yeah.
And there's no better evidence that friends are true friends when they descend instead of running away when things are really bad, when you know you are a very difficult person to be around.
Yeah.
But certain friends, including you, instead of running the other way at 100 miles an hour, came and were part of that and propped me up. And it's very difficult to accept that you need propping up sometimes. But I really needed it. And I was so grateful to have that system of support around me at that time.
How long was it in total? Because in some ways it seemed like a really long time. In some ways I feel like it was over quite quickly. Like how long was he in hospital for?
About 6 weeks, I think, and then at home very poorly for a few weeks after that.
And was that 6 weeks? Was it uncertain whether he was going to live or not for the whole 6 weeks? Or was
about a month. About the first month, yeah. At first he wasn't going to live, and then it was, we don't know if he's going to live. It took a good 4 weeks before they were starting to talk as if he was going to be able to come home.
Yeah. Well, I know he's agreed to come and speak to me as well, and I sort of thought with you I'd speak about your experience in the sanctuary. With him I wanted to speak about his experiences of nearly dying on more than one occasion. and sort of what that's like, because I think that's a very interesting topic. But yeah, so I can imagine for you, I do find, well, one thing that I actually one of the most destabilizing things for me in my life has always been learning that people aren't there in that way. And the reason is, and I think, like, I've always been a very loyal person and dutiful, I guess, probably the right word to use. And my dad's like that too. And from what my dad tells me of my granddad, he was like that too. So it's clearly a heritable thing that runs in the family. And I've always strived to be the sort of person that when things go wrong, then I'm someone that people can come to. And I've always said, you know, if someone rings me up at 3 a.m. and says, oh, I'm in your area, I haven't got a place to stay, I've totally fucked up, I'll be like, fine, I'll get out of bed, I'm coming to pick you up. Like, you know, no inconvenience is too great to me generally when it comes to, but I guess if the inconvenience to me is smaller than the inconvenience to the other person of them putting up with whatever shit they've got themselves into, then I will always try and be there for people. And you know, I think even before Will went into hospital, I don't, like, we obviously knew each other and had been sabbing and done all these different things, but it's not like we'd ever really had much in the way of like sitting down and having a conversation or spending any time together outside those activities. But I was like, to me, when I knew about what was happening, I was like, well, I can, and therefore I should. And one of the things I've always struggled with the most when it has happened in my life is expecting that to be reciprocated, and then finding out it's not there. It's always been really destabilizing in the times that it has happened. You know, I don't want to sound ungrateful, because in those situations people have emerged that maybe I wouldn't have expected to be really reliable or to be there, and people who maybe I did expect it from have proven themselves true to sort of my expectations and things like that. So, you know, I have been very, very lucky to have a number of people around in different situations, but not having that to me is like the most terrifying thing in the world. Family and friends are an amazing resource for getting us through things, and are capable of, I don't know, I guess it's one of those situations where you see, to some degree, you see how much value you have as an individual, because people value you that much that they're willing to do that. But also you get an insight into the kindness and generosity that exists in the world, and the potential for good that exists within people. You know, it's really insightful and inspiring, I think.
Yeah, when you are exposed to a higher degree than the average person to the evil of the world, what people are willing to do to animals, and then you have to pick up the pieces as best you can. I think at times I've got a bit of a skewed idea of what humanity is, and how many people are good people and how many people are bad people. So reminders like when Will was in hospital are fantastic, because it just does remind you that the world isn't that bad a place, really. There are decent people still out there. I get sort of a bit of a confused idea of what humanity is, I think, sometimes, because I am day after day after day exposed to some pretty horrid stuff, as I'm sure you are.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've had that conversation with people before, where I'm like, sometimes it just feels like everyone's abusing their children everywhere I go, or, you know. And
I think everybody's abusing their animals.
Yeah, but it's... And I think people have a negativity bias, you know, naturally. And there's a reason for that, like an evolutionary reason why we'd have a negativity bias, because when things go good for you, they can sort of... You know, they go good for you, but that's fine. When things go bad, you could die, and survival's pretty important. Survival is a lot more important than having cake or anything like that. So we have to be predisposed to pay more attention to the things that can harm us and the negative. And it's very easy to get skewed into thinking that the world is a horrible place full of evils and things like that. But actually, it's good to take a step back, or to be forced to take stock of that and see that the world's pretty balanced. You know, it's one of the... I don't know if you ever heard of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He wrote a book called The Gulag Archipelago, and I'm going to quote him, but before I quote him, I want to give the background to it, because I think that the background to it makes it more profound than the quote itself does. He was basically he was Russian during the era of the Soviet Union, and he was fighting on the front lines in World War II when he was put in a gulag for criticising the government in a letter to a friend, and in the gulag he took it upon himself to write a book documenting what was happening, but there was complications with writing this book, you know, because you don't have the resources to do it in the gulag, and so he would memorize pages and write little bits on scraps of paper he could get and things like that. And eventually he was released from the gulag, published this book. Publishing the book got him sent to the gulag. In the gulag he got cancer, he overcame his cancer, was released from the gulag, published a second book.
I can see where this is going.
He got the government attempted to assassinate him, and he got expelled from Russia. I can't remember where he went to live, actually. But he then published a third book, and basically these 3 books make up the Gulag Archipelago, and he was... his book played a significant part in the downfall of the Soviet Union, because it basically exposed the fact that they had these work camps where they were imprisoning absolutely everyone and working them to death and starving all their people, and it was, you know, one of the most horrendous atrocities of the 20th century and, well, of all time, really. And he was writing about, if I remember correctly, it's been a little while, but he saw a guard in the gulag who he used to be in school with, and he basically said, you know, they would come to try and recruit guards to our school, and some people would go and some people wouldn't, and in another life, in a slightly different circumstance, then I could have been a guard as well. And he said, let's watch me butcher this quote. He said, gradually it was exposed to me that the line that divides good and evil cuts not through nation states or political parties or ideologies, but through the heart of every man, and divides the heart of every man, and in the most... Let me see if I can get this right. In a heart that is most consumed with evil, there remains a tiny corner of untainted good, and in the heart that's entirely good, there remains one I've forgotten the word he used, but it basically says, you know, the line that divides good and evil cuts through the heart of every man, and in even the best of hearts, there's a small little corner of evil, and in the worst of hearts, there's still a small little corner of good. And to me, I mean, it's a profound quote anyway that I've absolutely just butchered, and I'm going to have to go away and read 10 times over to make sure that next time I try it, I get able to do it right. But yeah, it's a profound quote anyway, but to read it in the context of the book, in the situation that he's in when he's starving and trapped in this gulag, that he managed to think and write that just makes it 100 times more profound and impactful.
Yeah. I definitely have heard that quote before. I recognise it, so he didn't butcher it so badly that I didn't recognise it. I just didn't know where I knew it from. So
okay.
I can take
a guess of how it might have got to you, because I think I've...
it could have been through you.
Yeah, before. It could have been through me, or it could have been possibly through Adeline, because I've sent it to her in a text before, because we were having a conversation about it. But yeah, I feel like we've probably come to an appropriate place to end the conversation. It's been really good. It's been nice to get an insight into things that I didn't know anywhere near as in depth as I did, and I think it will be useful for people to hear, and there'll be something inspiring, and I will put a link to Charlie's Place in the description so that people can go over and check it out and
thank you,
donate if they want to. There's about 4 people who watch this, so.
Thank you for pushing me to do it.
No, that's all right. It's fine.